We wanted to do this lecture in true Hamming style. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that this afternoon, among other things here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Moline's retirement lecture.
Well, thanks so much for that welcome and for coming to this room. This is a room I sort of feel like I've invited you to my turf. None of my geography colleagues particularly like it because it's too big, but we got used to it over the years, and so it's loaded with maps and things like that. So it's easy to welcome you to my home playing field for the day. But thanks really so much for coming. I know you had other things you could do this afternoon. Especially, I would add, it's really nice, this would note with to all the faculty and administration and staff. But at the last minute this morning, one of the persons on the recent Asian trip was in an office, and somehow it came up about this afternoon, and I thought, yeah, it might be kind of fun to have some of the Asian term people come. And just on about 4 hours notice, here we've got a good contingent of them who decided to come and be part of this. I also really thank my geography colleagues for wanting to do something. They're the ones who said last year, what do you want to do? We want to do something for you in your retirement. And then I remembered Ed Hamming, and I have that Hamming endowed chair, maybe for 4 more days. I think the dean then will appoint somebody else. But the same thing, we wanted to do something for Ed Hamming when he retired. He says, I don't want to go to some event where people simply shake my hands and say thanks for this. He said, I'd rather give a lecture because that was the European tradition. And so we liked that. It was great. And as I told some of you in that advance notice, I wish people, ever since Hamming until the present, retired faculty would do that. And I hope it starts a tradition for now forward. Because when I would go to say thanks to other people, what I really wanted to do was not to have him listen to my thanks or her listen to that. I wanted to say, sit down. Let me tell you some stories from my life and some ideas that are important to me. So I hope some of the faculty who are continuing may pick up on this, and maybe it will start a tradition. I also, but before turning to this journey and celebrating our community, I'm thinking of the death of 2 great colleagues, Lars and Jesse, in this community. Both of them really loved this place and contributed much, and we will miss them collectively, and I will miss them personally. So let's remember them as we think about community. Which maybe the community here is what makes us sad, because we do know people across disciplines, and so that's what makes it sad. So about my journey. Where did it begin? Well, of course, you have to single out parents. My father was a Lutheran clergyman, and he never made much money. In fact, I kept in the record. He was a distinguished pastor, but when he, in several objects, buildings even in northern Illinois are named after him. But his peak salary in 1970 was $9,200. I started teaching in '68, so by 1970, I think my salary was probably about $8,000 or $8,200. And so therefore, it's interesting that my father, at the end of a distinguished career, was only making $1,000 more than this youngster in the family. But despite their my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Despite that, we had relatively, so they didn't have that much money, but travel was the way they spent their vacations. And so we would go off to different parts of the U.S. in the kind of cars that were available then, and I'm sure that that's what got a spark for travel going for me. Then I came to Augustana, and some of you know that I did come here as an undergraduate, started in 1960. So actually, that means I guess I would have been here 53 years, not just 45. But I majored in math, and I've always been grateful to the math department. I don't know if any of them are here today, but have a little extra soft spot for the math teachers because it was my major. And I've always appreciated that. I value the real and often perceived benefits. If you're a math major, people say, oh man, you must be smart. Well, we don't have to tell them the truth. I'm a math major, and it really has served very well, and I appreciate it. A person who is now deceased, but I owe him a great deal, Dr. Ben Zobrist. The history department knows about him. He was the one who opened my eyes to Asia. Took 2 courses from him, absolutely loved it. This guy was a lecturer from the word go. As soon as the class would begin, boy, it was a lecture A to Z, but it was enthralling lecture to do that. By the way, he left Augie to become the director of the Truman Museum and Library in St. Louis, or in Kansas City, so you know he was a great professor, and we were lucky to have him here. And I was lucky to be able to have him introduce me to Asia. Who knows, if I hadn't had a course from Ben Zobrist, the different path that my life would have taken. So thanks to the Zobrist family. Then Ed Hamming, and as a student, I took a course from Ed Hamming in the junior year. I just thought, well, I want to take this. People had talked about him a lot. Transportation geography, I loved it. I can almost remember the moment in the library when I was doing more reading than what was assigned. And no professor was looking over my shoulder about this, and then suddenly I thought, you know, I'm actually having more fun with this than doing math proofs. I was doing okay in math, so it wasn't like, okay, that's too tough, I'm going to switch. And so I thought, yeah, let me take another course or 2 like that, and I found out that's sort of where the passion was. I took 2 more courses from him, one on Europe, one on physical geography, and then that's when I decided that graduate study should be in geography. He encouraged me to apply to the best places in the country, and I applied to the University of Chicago, which was #1. I didn't think I had a chance in the world. Well, not only was I accepted, but I got a full ride. I got a full ride all the way through. The total cost of my graduate education at the University of Chicago was $15, because I had to pay a foreign language examination fee. But what a privilege, and thank goodness for Ed Hamming because I suppose every senior, you may do good work here, but you don't have any idea how good you are in the larger market. And so thank goodness he said, don't undersell yourself. Go for Wisconsin, go for Minnesota, go for Chicago. And I'm glad he did. What a lucky privilege it was to study at the University of Chicago with some of the top people in the field, especially Marvin Meitzel, who was already at that age the author of the defining book in cultural geography. Marvin Meitzel is still teaching at the University of Chicago right now, and still inspiring students. That's outstanding. Gilbert White, who then is in water resources, and Ruben and I particularly know about his work, but he was a liberal arts person and all kinds of credentials, so Augustana later gave him an honorary doctorate. And that was before they were expecting such people to give a lot of money. Gilbert White didn't give any money to the college, but he still got an honorary. Norton Ginsburg was at Chicago, and he was the top Asian geographer in the U.S. And others. What a great privilege, and it made all the difference in my life to go out from that place. Then, luckily, in 1968, when this department was able to expand to 2 people, I applied, thinking I might go here for a couple of years because I wanted to maybe get out of the Midwest for a bit. But the choice was either to come here and teach smaller classes or go to Northern Illinois and teach about 400 students. As I finished up the dissertation, was an easy choice, and happened to choose me for that, and so here we are. And then one other point about Hamming, and that is, I've been here a year and a half, and so in the winter of 69-70, Janet and I were decided, before we had a family, we're going to go overseas in the summer like that, just have a kind of an experience on our own before we had kids. But then I heard on the radio, you can get a round-the-world ticket for $1,271. 16 stops. You could pick your own airlines, pick your own stops, as long as you stayed in the Northern Hemisphere. Whoa, did that sound good? Coming back with the Hamming, riding, and he was sitting shotgun, was driving, coming back from Geneseo. I told him, I said, we were going to be gone in the summer, but I just heard this thing. I said, well, wouldn't it be fun to do that? And he says, no, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I got to teach. He says, and this all happened within that one moment. He said, don't worry, I'll cover for you. You ought to go on it if you can handle it. And then now when I look back on it, how bold was that? I taught here a year and a quarter. And now I'm deciding I'm going to take off. I don't know whether that would be allowable. But again, that made all the difference. So Jen and I were gone for 5 months. Her parents didn't have a lot of money either. But we subleased our apartment, sold our car, did everything in order to make it financially possible. And it made all the difference in the world. Instead of seeing places that people normally will see when they're retired, We saw them when we were 25, 26, in my case, or 23, 24 for jamming. And thank goodness for Ed Hamming, or it wouldn't have happened. And I wouldn't have been able to use those slides, those illustrations for my whole career. So I tell students off the record in the courses, I say, don't tell your parents I said this, but when you finish with your degree, do something bold, shoot off to another part of the world, and then before you have your family and before you get too settled down. But from then on, and this is where it comes to you, this whole community, you and the many predecessors and those who could not come today, provided the context for my career. I know it's an obvious statement, but it's so important. It was why I am so grateful to this community and wanted this chance to talk to you and thank you. That truly is the main reason for the lecture. We're going to get to some substance in a minute, but the main reason is this thank you to all of you. This is the context for each of us. Geography colleagues, especially Hammond for 12 years, and my great colleague Charlie Mahaffey for 35. I was lucky to have that symbiotic relationship with Charlie for 35 years, but also Ruben and Jenny for the last decade, and now Chris and Matt and Michael. And two great secretaries, Kathy and Gail. Imagine this, for my whole career I only had to work with two secretaries. Super. One could not ask for a better group of colleagues than our geography department has been. So thanks to all of you for that. Geology colleagues, great folks to share Swenson Hall of Geosciences. For Excel, he was retired when I came, but he still came to the building, and he's the great man that everybody describes him, and so humble and supportive of this young rookie faculty member. Richard Anderson, Sundelius, the current group of Bill, Mike, and Jeff. Thanks to all of them for being great folks in the building. Biology, to Russ Reedinger, who's now in another place, with whom I worked to get the first cross-disciplinary environmental studies stuff going in 1972 and 73. Then Tom Rennie succeeded him, and then Bo came, the one who truly was tenurable, and so all the years with Bo and Kevin Keedy and others. Now all the environmental studies faculty that now number, according to our printed page, 15 people from 9 departments. Thanks to all of them. All the Asian studies colleagues, and many of them who are here today, especially those 27 with whom I have spent weeks or months in East Asia. Jack Hullett, Ralph Radloff. I don't think Ralph was able to make it. He thought he might be able to. He still lives in the Quad Cities. Glenn Mott. Those were the 3 of my colleagues when we started the first East Asian term in 1974. And since then, there's so many I could name, but I thought we ought to name Van Simmons and Bob Tallich, who are here, Marcia Smith, who's at Faculty Welfare, Jen May Ma, Peter Shaw, Ben Nefsker, Jim Winship. All of those went with multiple trips to Asia, and then other people like the Marmays and et cetera in the room, and 10 others with whom we shared some time. Thanks to you for being part of a supportive community. I wouldn't have been able to go to Asia if it would have been just me. It only worked because it was a community of us that believed in this. The education department colleagues, Mike I think is maybe the only one who was able to make it, who graciously and correctly have included geography as a requirement for elementary teachers and social science secondary teachers. So thanks Mike for that, and to the others that you can relay that message to them. To the history and political science colleagues, with whom my specializations in historical geography and urban planning overlap. And it's always fun to talk with them about such topics. The librarians, and we've got 2 of them here today, Connie and Carla, and then Jamie now off in Chicago, and others. Terrific folks, so helpful and patient with us when we may not know the new library technology. And then the next 2 categories mean a lot to me. Music and theater leaders, Hurdy, Lambrecht, Culver, Fouts, Marky Ellis, Jeff Cousins, all of whom I consider really close personal friends, and others. And in the coaching field, we got Paul Olson, who's here, Fred Whiteside, Gray Giovanni, Tom Jesse, Kistler, Lindmark, and others. It's not easy at a lot of other schools, friends that I have teach at other schools, to be able to have that kind of close relationship beyond the discipline with people in the arts and in athletics, and not just that you go and cheer the game on, but you see them at social events or at meetings on campus and consider them friends. That made my life interesting here, and for you. The chaplains, a place where in the midst of secularizing trends, religion still is studied and has a presence on the campus. Swanee for many years, Richard Priggy now, and Sister Marilyn, I don't know whether she was able to make it or not, and again others. The records office, all of them for their patience and diligence in doing what we might consider tedious work, especially Susan and Lisa, both of whom were here in my classes years ago. So I'm grateful to them. They are terrifically supportive even when they got to be hard-nosed with us. The admissions and financial aid folks. I told Megan that I was going to give special attention. I really have special feelings of gratitude toward them. Where would we be without them? We all think our program sells and all of that, but if we didn't have people out there getting the right materials, making the phone calls, I don't think any of us would have the jobs. And so I really recognize the admissions folks. They've been so kind to us in our building, and I think it's been mutual, and they deserve every bit of thanks that any of you faculty colleagues can ever give them. Please do so. The physical plant staff. Mark Steiger, the landscape one that Bo and I have worked with a bit. Ed Skelton for all the moving that he does. Tricia Hines for all the vans that she has rented out in the building. And Pocky down in the faculty, and again, many others. I know I probably am offending people through the line here, and many more who do so much for this place every day. And I'm grateful that Darlene was able to make it, because, you know, I really appreciate the work she did. She could really, Darlene knows how to keep personal moments, good friendship from business. And we're good friends, as some of you are, but you could go to an office someday and she could be just as blunt and direct and telling you this is the way you got to do it. And you're thinking, wait, I thought we were friends. So, in sum, everyone counts. Everyone counts. Without all of them, we as faculty would not have the context for our work. And my 45 years wouldn't have been anything what they are if it weren't for this whole community. I want to thank all of these people from the depth of my heart and countless unnamed people for making the journey possible. Where can one have a job which allows so many connections, academic and non-academic, beyond one's own discipline, to supplement the great department that we have? So again, thanks very much to all of you for that. Next, how about some reflections on the contributions coming from that journey? I wasn't sure whether I should share some of these, but then some people said, yeah, go ahead and do so, but I'm proud of them, so I guess each of you have things you're proud of. And so I don't want to take this and be taken in a boasting sense, but just in a feeling that I'm glad we were able to do these things. Sustaining and growing a strong department, particularly with 35-year colleague Charlie McAfee. I think even by outside sources, this is probably the second best geography department at liberal arts colleges in the large Midwestern area, probably only surpassed by McAllister. And I'm proud about the role I've been able to have in that, along with past and present colleagues. So there were only two of us back in '68, and it's grown. It's also, just as an aside, to remind somebody yesterday that we were talking about it, and that for us, we end up with about 45 majors, but maybe we have one person every other year who comes to Augustana wanting to major in geography. And so all those 45 people who major are people who took classes from the one or the other of us and found this to match up with their personal interests. And lo and behold, we have 45. It's not like people come here to go into accounting or law or medicine. Something it comes naturally out of what we do, I guess. We have had senior inquiry. I pushed that. I started that in our department as a requirement for all geography majors in 1972. The school finally went that way for the campus in the early 2000s, but we've got on file 41 years, or 40 years now, but 41 time this year's done, of senior research projects required 3 credit or more for all of our majors. I'm glad I got that started and that it caught on in the department and spread elsewhere. The tradition of field trips in almost all our classes. I'm grateful for that part in our department, budget that allows us to do that, and to the many alums who have contributed money for several special field trip funds. It's what we have to do. It's the way we want to have people learn. The cross-disciplinary environmental studies program. I told you that Russ Reedinger and I got it started in the early 70s, and wow, has it grown. And so, as I already told you how many, that then became a concentration. About the time Bo came, and then became a minor and a major. Now every school's got environmental studies, but when we're talking with recruits, first year, high school people coming, you can say, look at Augustana, we can show in the record. We've been with cross-disciplinary environmental studies for 40 years, when everybody else has now gotten on it in the last decade or two. I'm pleased about that. Obviously, the East Asian term. Started by the four of us in '74, who knew where it was going to go in a European-based institution, but it's lasted, go every 3 years. We just finished the 15th fall program that was, again, a mountaintop experience with these folks and others, all of us who are partially still thinking about places across the ocean. 2 basketball trips, how much fun was that? 1 choir trip and some others. So over 1,200, I've been with over 1,200 students in East Asia. And that program isn't just a lab group. There have been 27 faculty members from 18 departments that have participated in that East Asian term, from what Hullett, Radloff, and Glenma and I started. That's exciting, obviously. The community involvement and connections, what we call the community academic associates. This is something that we have believed all along our department should reach out. Obviously, don't expect you to read this, but we started using this name even about a decade ago. We have so many connections in the community. People that work with our students, provide us with data, invite us to serve on boards or commissions, and the list is about 56 people. And about every 2 years, we have a banquet for these people as a way of saying thanks. I felt all along that you have to have some community connections like that, and I'm glad that that has caught on. And now the school, again, is so interested in community connections, and so I'm grateful for that. How about some particular special events? I wasn't going to say this, but I kept saying, I guess I want to take enough. I was so honored. I was honored to be asked by the Association of American Geographers, our national 8,000+ member organization, to chair for 2 years its Committee on Scientific Freedom and Responsibility. And I sometimes wonder, how did little Moline get picked to do that? And I think I got almost certain, because in 1989 I was on the committee, and then the Tiananmen incident occurred in China. And our committee was asked to formulate a response. Well, that was the same year we were going to have a fall program go to East Asia. And Van Simmons and Jim Winship and I prepared a statement on why we should continue to go. Obviously, we deplored what China had done, but there's a lot of other things to learn about China. The cultures, the language, the economics, the cultural geography, the human landscape, environmental issues, history. And we said we ought to go. And President Treadway, the academic who knew Nazi Germany, he knew how appreciative the German scholars were, even during a time of nasty stuff going on in Germany, to keep the channel open. So Treadway didn't take him more than 5 minutes to say, of course, if you fellows, there's the 3 of us, thought you want to go, we go. And we were going to go. Well, I used that statement and presented a minority report on the Committee on Scientific Freedom and Responsibility. The other members of that committee, the coincidental makeup, said, no, we shouldn't go there. Any country that will do that, we shouldn't go at all. I wrote the other position, and basically the position that I took was what was adopted by the AAG Council. And so then about 8 months later, they asked Professor Moline, would you chair the Committee on Scientific Freedom and Responsibility? I don't have any great things to say what we did during my term in office. There were no political blow-ups and no faculty and no professors, but that was a special thing that I never would have known coming. But with the help of Van and Jim and people here on campus, how you can respond to a major global issue. I was pleased to have my dissertation be used in the 1990s by WGBH Boston as the framework context for the first 2 hours of its 4-part series on driving passion, on what the impact automobile meant. As another great special event, means nothing academically. but I was coming back from India. Somebody on a Singapore Airlines 747-400 said, gee, you've been traveling a lot, because we were going from Singapore back to Japan, and then you've been traveling a lot. I said, yeah, but I love to fly. And they said, how'd you like to fly in the cockpit? That's an easy one. I said, oh, I'd love to. He said, let me come back. He went and talked with the pilot. He said, come on up in 10 more minutes. And so I got to fly in the cockpit of a 747-400 for a half hour flying over the South China Sea. And nobody's touching a thing. If you ever wonder who this plane is for. The pilots are sitting there with their hands over this, all the dials, everything there, and the plane is just going and nobody's touching anything. They said you need to maybe change elevation, and the person did that. So we're chatting away with, so you feel great comfort, and that's one of the best things. I actually got to fly in the pilot area with Royal Nepalese Airlines across the Kathmandu Valley into the Himalayas, Garuda International over Central Australia, and Japan Asia Airways on the route from Taipei to Hong Kong. That won't happen post 9/11. I mean, I'm lucky that I was able to do that. That won't happen again, but it's fun to be a non-pilot to be able to have those images out the front. A special party on the USS Ronald Reagan, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, which was in Kuala Lumpur for diplomatic and expatriate people at this party. And Phil Hoffman, our grad who was number 3 in the Malaysian embassy at the time, he said, Norm, bring the suit and tie along. I know you don't normally wear that. Bring it along. I can't tell you why, but bring it along. It's something special. And so we got to be party and have a whole tour and talk with the pilots up on the deck of the biggest aircraft carrier. Being the speaker on the Mississippi River boat trip is part of the party for the King of Sweden, which I'm sure Lars had something to do in helping to bring him here, and maybe John Norton also, to be part of that in late 1990s, to be the speaker. And then beyond that, to be with the king and his wife and the captain, that's all, and myself in the pilot house for about 20 to 30 minutes with observations and commentary on the Mississippi. Now, he's only the King of Sweden, but hey, wouldn't you like to hear that? Being the first American academic group admitted to China in 1977, and we'll show a slide about that. Being invited by the Republic of China to attend the 100th anniversary of the country in October 2011, and to meet the president of that country that morning, only 20 minutes before the national 100th anniversary celebration began in the square. That was pretty special. I've been a lucky person. That's what I emphasize that. Now, credentials may have played a part in some of that, but some of these things, there was still a lot of luck. And that's why, again, I don't mind sharing that with you, because sometimes just the roll of the dice happens to be okay, and it was in this case. All right, for maybe 5 minutes, I want to share some things about, some of you are not geographers. And so let's turn now to some substance, and I want you to get a basic lesson. Some of you still get us confused with geology. And Bo has heard me do this often. I say, anybody who does that, they say, I can't get geography straight. I say, you know, you've got a good point. I just can't keep the distinction between biography and biology. And usually that's the end of the debate. But here, I'm going to go through this quickly. We are a spatial science, which means we can study anything. What is the distribution of, and you can plug that in, anything that you wish. Where are the movements of people, goods, and ideas? You can have a geography of anything, which means a space dimension, just like you can have a history of anything. That's you want to remember, that's the definition of geography. It's a spatial science. And then we ask the question, why there? An explanation of the locations and distributions. And that becomes spatial analysis. And that sometimes is what's forgotten. You just don't memorize locations and maps. And then for some phenomena, businesses, urban land uses, parks, trails, housing, you name it, where should they be located? And when one thinks about something like that, I just got the latest population data. The United States is going to be at a total of about 400 million. We're going to gain almost 90 million people in the lifetime of the working lifetime of the students. And about 80 of that 90 million are going to be in cities. there better be some good people helping to find the right locations for urban land uses. When we think of how you can have a geography of anything, these are some of the examples that I've used in class over the years to let people know that we don't have to have the physical environment involved. Where do countries drive on the wrong side of the road? That's geography. Now there's no soils, no climate, no landforms, no nothing there. We're simply looking at where are these things found, and of course all the students would know, and all of you would know what accounts for that. Well, it's usually colonial history, and that's good. So what's the distribution of something, and then you ask why there. And then one that is close to my heart, and we do this always on our urban field trips, and that is the trips to Chicago. And here you see the ethnic geography of Chicago. The ethnic geography, the distribution of ethnic groups. Wonderful color map and an encyclopedia of Chicago. And they do that regularly. So we're looking at, that's geography. It's a human geography kind of an issue that is at stake. Then I thought just to let you know, again, some of the things just in the last week, to let you know, once you keep your eyes open and once students keep their eyes open, just this week in the paper, there was something about the total corn acreage and the total conservation acres in 5 counties around here. So this is the geography of that. There was one in the paper just, a couple of weeks ago, distribution of slavery in the world. So that's, again, it's a social topic, but it's geography. In this issue just arrived yesterday from the University of Chicago, the decline in homicide rates by counties, by neighborhoods in Chicago, the ratio of homicide rates to the city average. That also was in the paper just this week. And then there was also one, and a little clipping, I guess, slipped away, but it was where in the world do people have positive perceptions about homosexual marriages? Homosexual marriages, where in the world? And so it described this in a table form. So that would be the geography of acceptance of homosexuality. And so I think you get the idea of what we mean when we say geography is a spatial science. Within that, and so as a cultural geographer, you can see, oh yeah, for some phenomena, it's always good to know that one of our grads, Tom Whiteman, if you've been to Noodles and Company, his job was to choose the locations. Where should we have Noodles and Company? Geography, business and geography combination. And then Walgreens, the same way. One of our grads works for Walgreens and helps to determine where they should be located, the spatial aspect of business. We're also in ecological science. Sometimes it's a core part of geographic study, but not implicit in the core definition, and not at all involved in some studies, as I mentioned to you. Most professional geographers, though, do have training in both. And so therefore we're in a position to really study human-environment relations with both a natural and social science perspective. In most cases, it's two-way relationship, and so we use the term possibilism. Nature offers possibilities, people choose. But then there are some cases, such as the ones that are listed there, in which even the human responses and the preparations for the future vary from place to place. And the last point is an important one. Gilbert White in the Chicago School of Geography was the one that led that. None of us in the room is objective. No one. And Gilbert White then said that therefore everybody who makes a decision about the environment is making it on the basis of his or her perception of the facts and the situation around. Everyone. There's not an objective person around. And so therefore White said, if that's the case, if we're really going to talk about good decision making, we've got to pay attention to what is the role of perception, why people in one place will decide to do this and people elsewhere will do that. And that's been an organizing principle of my class, and my replacement, Matt Folklar, has indicated he's going to continue to have part of that when he teaches the resource decision making here. Geographers just include this, and this is where there's a nice overlap with psychology. Jack Hullett and I used a team teacher course here actually on environmental perception. He would talk about what makes people's minds tick to have some people more willing to deal with chaos and others say, I'll take my chances. And so who knows? Some themes now within these broad categories. we always talk about scale. We try to get people to think if you're analyzing a particular issue, you've got to think, all right, how does that particular site or that issue fit into a larger spatial context? But also, at this point, we need to subdivide that down to something else. So you could use the Augustana campus. If we're going to understand Augustana, we've got to understand it's part of the Quad Cities, Western Illinois, et cetera, et cetera. We also have to divide up the campus, what's happening north of 7th Avenue and elsewhere, and you keep on going. One thing we try to get in geographic analysis is that ability to move across scales. And so there's that perspective of scale. Another spatial context concept we try to stress, the notion of externalities, which the economists talk about, but in our case we use it literally in a spatial sense. How can the units on any one piece of land, what are the effects externally on adjacent pieces of property or the state or anything else? And here we have that. In analysis, we can try to identify and analyze these externalities. So then you can put them in the front of the decision makers. If we do this, this is going to have this impact on neighbors, on the next town over, and so on. And at that point, though, then it becomes a value question. Who cares? Yeah, we know it's going to do that, but we still have to do what we got to do. And even if that's negative, tough, we got to do that. And that becomes a value question. And so sometimes I'm asked, what do I see the connections between being a geographer and my Christian background? Well, if you are of the Christian tradition and a number of the other faiths, you should worry about how your actions impact others. So an interesting story. We had a stormwater management issue in Rock Island. And everybody, depending on the so-called footprint of your property in the area, should only do, you're going to have to pay a tax. Because the more pavement that you have, the more water is going to run off. And then the city has to pay more to fix it. I think you get the idea of that. If you've got a wooded lot, most of the water is going to soak in. If you cover with a pavement, everything's going to run off. So we went to pass that. Churches wanted exemption. Churches have big parking lots. Some of them made statements at the meeting. I got home from the meeting, and I think maybe the next day I got a call from a pastor. I understand you're on the planning commission. I'm the pastor of some church, and I want to talk. I said, excuse me, sir. Let me put it this way. My father was a Lutheran clergyman. And one of the things we're taught in the Lutheran and Christian tradition is to watch out for my brothers and sisters. We shouldn't do anything that will hurt our brothers and sisters. If we give you an exemption for your lot, you're essentially saying you can dump more water on, and that will have negative impacts on your neighbors. And I don't think that's very Christian. So thank you for calling. But it was actually absolutely correct and kind of position. I think then when we get to, let's see, another one here, so at this point, some of these other themes, spatial inequalities. Geographers are very concerned about that these days. How inevitably phenomena are unequally distributed. Many geographers would reject the overstatement that the world is flatter, rather than suggest because of greater economic gaps and variable access that actually the world is becoming hillier. And here we just finished talking with the students about this. You won't be able to understand all these variables, but there are a number of variables when you look at the different provinces in China. Don't worry about the numbers, but look at how those numbers vary. That happens to be gross domestic product per capita. You've got some provinces in China, 14,750. You've got other provinces of 3,100. Among the China Specialty Group of American Geographers, this is the geographic topic they study most. Spatial inequalities and how our governments or people or societies are going to deal with these inequalities. Some things you can't change, others you can. So actually China's leadership now talks about growth with equality. They're concerned about this, and they're going to try and see what they can do to shift that. So that's a theme that we geographers look at. The character of places. These are a lot of things here that we could look at. We geographers are persistent. They're curious about places. How do they function? The sense of place. The topophilia. Many of these are the kind of books that people would have looking at the power of place. Geographers are very interested in that. Topophilia, people's attachment to places. And then we get into the interpretation of landscapes. How do you read landscapes? This is fun stuff to do. And there are books that geographers write. The interpretation of ordinary landscapes, or Grady Clay, an unconventional guide to real places. We have fun looking at these spots. When you start looking at the landscape, you see some crazy stuff out there. This is up in northern Minnesota. The Shuffle Bus. The Fresh Air Taxi of America Incorporated. Or this was down by St. Louis. And they were trying to stop a highway going through what was very good farmland. And then somebody obviously very patriotic. We have some fun in looking at landscapes, and that goes with our profession. And on you can see, historical geography is another part of our discipline, how patterns of spatial organization and or human environment change over time, in particular places and over large nations. My master's thesis, my PhD, you can read what they are. Many people might say, I didn't know geography could cover that kind of thing. But it gives you an idea of what that's about. Well, what I want to do in the remaining time is to highlight a few of the sort of major, give you a little substance on one topic and then look at a few slides if your time allows. And for this, I wanted to use the idea of borders. Think about borders, and I sort of subtitled this as necessary, fascinating, disrupting, and challenging. Think of the many borders in your life. Property borders. When we move on, you'll see this in Chicago. Any place, think where you live, property borders. Or this one. Or these places where there's a shift in the appearance of the street pattern. Or here, every one of these people have a border between their property and the next one. And in some cases, it's like this. Think of the borders in your world. There are zoning borders defining what are allowable land uses. Think of the impacts when the borders between different kinds of land uses, such as commercial land and residential area, are not handled very well. Often they are abrupt with lots of externalities and usually more negative on the poor or less powerful people. Think of the recent issue in Rock Island that some of you got involved in over the land use issues near the Audubon School. Rock Island, as we speak, is developing, and it will be completed and finalized in January. The new land use map, where it's identified for every piece of property in the city. What should be its long-term future use? Think of that border. For me, I tend to be on the side of the poor people and the ones who are less powerful when it comes to zoning decisions. Many communities try to minimize these conflicts with minimum border spacings and or landscaping requirements. For me, the need to minimize these spacings is very important, and in my opinion, you should listen carefully to what the neighbors, the ones who are going to be there 365 days a year. A border issue. We have situations then where neighborhoods are defined, borders are defined. Look at this one in Rock Island that some of you know. This is the map. Some of you may say, well, that's maybe not that important, but some people want to be. Am I really in the Broadway district or not? Am I on the Hilltop district or not, which is close to the college? They want to know where that border is, and there are some people who are upset that they are in the Hilltop, that they're listed in there, and there are other people who wish they were. Think about that. Gang territories, as our students have learned from Fireman Kirk Flowers when we go to the south side of Chicago on field trips. Those gangs know where their territory is, and you cross that border and you're in trouble. But they've got a border ban. Think of municipal boundaries. Sometimes clear and sensible, small towns, and suddenly it becomes farmland. But sometimes borders, aren't they nonsensical? Like here in the Quad Cities. I mean, why do we need that border between Moline and Rock Island, and Moline Moline and East Moline, in Bettendorf. It makes no sense. Or in Chicago metropolitan area, adjacent one after another, over 300 separate municipalities. Those borders make no sense. Portland wants to use even urban growth boundaries, a good planning idea. Let's draw a boundary so that stuff doesn't go all over the place. But then people get upset, oh, will we be within or without that boundary? And so that may impact some of you. Regional areas. Think about the bi-state around here. Bi-state and the Chicago metropolitan area for planning for Chicago. Everyone says issues impact the Quad Cities and the Chicago area are regional. Everybody admits that. But unfortunately, usually the recommendations from the regional groups are only advisory. And they'll tell you that. Thank you, but we'll decide separately in Bolingbrook, in Naperville, in Aurora, in Moline, in Silvis. Everybody says that. And so they want it to be their own thing. How to overcome localism, then, is a challenge for planners on issues that very clearly go beyond the border. There's the symbolism of being included in an area that may get some people excited. I think a year and a half ago, DeKalb was really excited that they expanded the defined Chicago metro area so that DeKalb could be considered part of Chicago metro area, and they were excited about that. Think of political congressional districts. We won't go into that, but that's incredibly important geographically. Politicians now are picking the districts that they want so that they can get elected rather than having more spatially sensible areas and then let the voters choose. Now they're picking, sort of, as you've heard people just this week on NPR, they had a little feature talking about that. State boundaries. Isn't it always kind of fun, perhaps here where we do all the time, to cross into states with new boundaries? When we have that, and here, let's have a look at a couple of slides that might be there. We leave this. Here's a look at this, the way our space is organized. These property boundaries in the Midwest, occasionally interrupted by a railroad, but otherwise pretty standard, and how different that is from upstate New York. The boundaries of properties there are on a different system, and it's very irregular. Think of the time zone boundaries that you and I have to get used to. We don't even see them, but they can change our lives. And notice in that one how Newfoundland actually is a half hour off, not a full hour. They chose. Or when you go to the state, I don't know about you, but for me, you know, even not crossing Iowa, Illinois anymore, because it's here all the time, but when you get to a new state, you kind of feel, oh, this is neat, we're into a new state. So there's something kind of fun about that. There's a wonderful book I invite you to look at, How the States Got Their Shapes. I recently got this for our daughter and her family in a paperback, and he said, put this in the glove compartment. So when you're traveling and you find some really weird state, pull this thing out. He covers all the states, are covered only about 4 or 5 pages, so it's a nice way to look at that. So they're kind of fun, but they're also significant. Think of the implications on life. State laws, states' rights, shopping habits. Some of us on the Illinois side admit go to Iowa occasionally for cheaper gas. And now Jana was just telling me this, that Iowa, the representative from Iowa, is all upset that California won't allow into the state, starting I think January 1st, any eggs that come from chickens which don't have enough room to flap their wings. And in Iowa, some of the cages, chickens can't flap their wings. So he's introducing a bill in Congress to prevent California from enacting that kind of a law, saying the whole country ought to be under the same law. But then the same people who advocate that on other issues will say, oh no, that's a states' rights issue. So this permeates in the U.S. Think of how many ways in which those borders make a difference. Illinois, think of when we turn then to what are some kinds of boundaries that we have. As Illinoisans, it's fun to reflect on how when Wisconsin was, when the territories were set up, Illinois went a little bit further north, Wisconsin loses. Ohio wanted to be able to have Toledo, so it bumped the Michigan border up in exchange for the UP. So Wisconsin loses the UP. And then a little later, when Wisconsin then head all the way over to the Mississippi River by Minnesota, Minnesota thought it'd make more sense to come back to the St. Croix. So Wisconsin loses again. So Wisconsin loses 3 times on the boundary. Well, what make good boundaries? Many people would think, well, rivers. No, they're terrible rivers. They're terrible boundaries. They're easy to use, but they're not good. Around the world, both sides of rivers use the river. Here we're stuck with the Mississippi as a border because of all things the treaties between England and France in 1763. So when we have guests coming from Africa and other Southeast Asia, we tell them, we empathize with how they got stuck with boundaries superimposed by colonial powers. We're stuck every time we go across that river and wondering why we cross in a state. We're there because of a 1763 decision made in Europe, which tended to have lasting quality to it. Rivers are bad. They also change courses. The first capital of Illinois, if you don't know this, Kaskaskia, now down south of St. Louis, is on the west side of the Mississippi. So if you want to go see, there's a little bit of Illinois that's on the western side. Part of Iowa is on the western side of the Missouri River. Right next to Omaha. You're in Omaha, you're driving, it says suddenly welcome to Iowa, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I haven't crossed the Missouri yet. No, it's a remnant of an old oxbow that was there. So the rivers are not so good. If you're going to use a natural feature, some people might say mountains. Use a mountain crest, because at least then the water goes toward the middle. Geometric boundaries, western U.S., we don't have to turn the light on. You know how geometric it is in west. That makes no sense either. That's the worst of all, because that cuts across natural features and it cuts across cultural ones. The best of all might be ethnographic. If you could map where the cultures are and then let the political map match that up. Well, one, that's hard to do, and it's very changeable. What may be working right now won't work elsewhere. So that's not really very good. But you try for that if you can. Also, once in some of our states, different cultures and economies are within one state. Illinois, California, Colorado, and Virginia have some very different cultural divisions within the state, with some parts believing that they are Forgottonia, like Michigan's UP. Sometimes great emphasis on boundaries that have some significance. And so if we look at some of these, look at how dumb this is. First of all, there we got this border, Iowa, Minnesota, along the Mississippi. Or this one. This is the bridge between Iowa and Nebraska, and magically, somehow right here, that makes sense. It's really stupid. But then there are some boundaries which, when they put them up, they thought they would be very lasting. Now, Van Simmons is one of the true experts on this and has co-published a book on this. And look at this wall. When they put it up, they thought it would really help define the distinction between the Han Chinese and the Mongolians and other minorities. Well, it obviously didn't work, but we're still fascinated by it. This group, we were just hiking there 3 weeks ago in this setting. Fantastic. Relic boundaries that somehow we're interested in. Then there are some that shows the distance along the upper, the main crest in the middle. Mike Wolfe has climbed that section of the Great Wall, going along the high peaks. Fortunately, some relic boundaries don't last, such as these shots taken on that 1970s trip. The East German-West German boundary cutting across the landscape. And bleak kind of borderland that's there. And this is from the West German side and from the East German side, and thank goodness it's now gone. Here's the famous checkpoint at Charlie. What would be some natural boundaries then that one would want? Ideally, there's the natural world, and therefore we work a lot with watershed boundaries. And so you would like to have people take into account this. This is factually defined. We know that the water that falls anywhere within those watersheds, where it's going to go. Anybody in the room would say, therefore we ought to manage it as a unit. And Kathy Wine and the River Action focuses things we try to do, get people to think at a watershed level. And it's so hard to get people to do that. We can define these watersheds with pretty good precision, and they guide land and water decisions, but most people don't want to give up their private rights for the sake of a whole watershed. And some people want to artificially move water from one side to another. Right now, the Great Lakes, Chicago takes some water out. Other people have eyes on all that water, but the 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces put some pressure on and passed in Congress a few years ago a law which said no more water will leave the Great Lakes area. At that point, we become possessive of our territory. Don't you touch our water. But then if you would say we're going to think together as a unit on that, now get those same provinces in those two states within that border to deal with good policy planning for the Great Lakes. Oh no, now it suddenly becomes a state's issue. That's only advisory. We're not going to be told in Wisconsin what Illinois happens to be doing. So I think what you get here, and there are many more, but I want to show a few other slides, the floodplain zones, that's another one. We know where floods are likely to occur, and we can tell people you shouldn't be there. But then people say, oh, that's a good guideline, but nobody's going to tell me within my particular property what I can do. So we're very selective in what boundaries we want to remain and what boundaries we want to go away. Because of time shortage, I don't say anything, but on the international level, there are all kinds of flows of goods and ideas and people, human migrations. And so we might say, oh, they're becoming a borderless world. No, we're not, because there are some places where they will allow certain things to go across and other things that they won't. Some people with the right visas will be able to get in, and other people with one from another country won't. So the world is filled with contradictions now between what some authors call the geography of flows, which tend to want to transcend boundaries. Highway systems, international treaties, flying system. Boundaries don't mean anything for that. So on the one hand, we're saying, yes, that's really good. But then on the other hand, we still want to be able to make our own national decisions. So sometimes borders are permeable, and sometimes they're not. And so that's what's tricky. Well, again, I want to show some slides. So let's see, Gail, if we could move to that. Here's the Great Lakes border. Didn't know how time would go today. There's the watershed. Here's the Great Lakes. Chicago was given permission 100 years ago to take water out, and so that's why other cities say, hey, Chicago, you can do it, why can't we? Chicago says, no, you can't, we just happened to do it before you, and now we can't do it anymore. One reason I wanted to share it was to give you a little substance, and I'm sorry we had to condense that a little, but also for me, this is now back to sort of the personal journey. My borders have been fascinating for me, and I hope they are for you. Somehow it's just one of the categories of spatial organization. And so this is the border between Hong Kong and China, right near the top, which when we first went in 1970, Janet and I on our own, and then the first Augie program, you couldn't cross it. There's the border. You look across, and here's where we stood, and we looked across. The upper third of that side is China. And I think how stupid it was. We would see this and we'd come back home and people say, I understand you saw China, what did it look like? And we would talk about that. Now I think how stupid could we have been? Or this one, okay, we used a telephoto lens. Now we've seen China. Oh no. Because the border is this part right here, just above my hand. Well, we walked across that in 1977, carried our own luggage. This is all that separates Hong Kong from Shenzhen. Long live the People's Republic of China. Long live the great unity of the people of the world. We went into a banquet hall and they had this wonderful picture showing people of every sort of race and ethnicity all gathering behind in good, joyful spirits. This is the building in which that place was. And reading this very clearly then were the pictures of Mao Zedong and the then leader Hua Guofeng. Well, this is Shenzhen, was a city then of about 30,000 people, a little less than Rock Island. And this is the way that relatively small town looked like. But then it was declared a special economic zone, a special border drawn by the leadership of China. Things started to change, and we fast forward. Shenzhen now has about 14 million people. So from 1980 to 2013, it went from 30,000 to 8 million urban core area, 14 million if you consider the metro area, the fastest growing city in world history. The border opened. The border became permeable for trade and U.S. and external investment. New houses going up, and it continues as we speak. Here, one of the places where thousands now cross that border daily, thousands, tens of thousands, who have permits to go between China and Hong Kong. Borders change. One of our grads, Phil Hoffman, when he was the #2 person in that embassy in Nepal, we went to visit him. He says, Norm, would you like to go see the Nepal-China border? Well, for a kid who grew up on the south side of Chicago and teaches at just Augustana and that kind of thing, I thought, wow, wouldn't that be great? So we went up this road, This river is the border, China on the right, Nepal on the left. There's the bridge we finally got to. Here's the bridge itself. You can see the border crossing with the People's Republic of China flag. And there's Janet and myself. This was about 7, 8 years ago when we were there. And we could walk across the border. And you would say, what kind of a border is that? We were surprised. Well, you can see the steepness of the topography behind it. China controlled the road access beyond that point. But at this point, this is the view from that bridge looking up toward the high plateau of Tibet. You have market villages, and some of you who know other parts of the world, or even in the US, where you have borders, suddenly you will get the clusterings of activities because people can maybe move across the border and buy some things that they wouldn't be able to do if they were 50 or 80 miles away. So almost every place, and that's what happened here. So in this village, you had stuff on the Nepal side, people transferring China goods back and forth onto this, and you go over onto the other side, and the goods were coming down from the People's Republic of China to then be shipped across this very open border for that spot, but not very far back behind it. So isn't that fascinating? This is Big Phil, our good friend, and he's coming back for the alumni gathering this weekend. Moved up, so he was actually #2 person in the U.S. Embassy. That's another part of the journey, as an aside, that I think makes life rich for all of us who teach here, particularly if you've been here a long time. Your grads, my grads, they end up with some fascinating careers, and wow, can we learn a lot from them. Sort of returns the favor, if you will. Here's I've been to the North Korean border in 3 places. This is the river on the east side. This seemingly placid place. North Korea is on the left side, China on the right. And here's a bridge going across. Of course, this is the first time I was there, and gee, North Korea, that's such a mystery. Looking across, not the best photo, but that's all they could get with the telephoto. And you've got some military installations. This was about 10 years ago. Here's the bridge. The local fellow, I was traveling with 3 20 to 25-year-olds, and they said, yeah, we go out on that bridge all the time. And I said, yeah, but you're not tall, and you're not a Caucasian American. And they said, well, it should be okay. It should be okay. So we walked across, because the bridge, the halfway point would be back behind me about 30 yards. So I can say I've been in North Korea. Right here, I am in North Korea. Right there's that, and there's the guard post. Well, they didn't shoot me. I'm here, so I guess it was okay. But that border, these kids, these young guys, they knew North Koreans didn't want to leave, and so they'd go back and forth across the ice. A permeable border for young kids who could bring China goods and supplies to the North Koreans with no worry about getting captured or being shot. They wouldn't let an American in. Then these are the people that I was traveling with in this little car for about 4 days. This is the border. This is a crazy narrow border where it's only about 300 yards wide. So you've got the river on one side, then you've got this narrow little strip, and then this is Russia on the other side. So again, I think all of you in the room, wouldn't you be excited? Across the way is North Korea. You're in this little narrow strip that's China, and on your left, 30 yards away, is the Russia at that point. I think all of you would enjoy that. There you are, you're looking across into Russia. I'm standing on a road in China looking into Russia on the other side of that simple fence. Notice where the fence goes down. It goes down through a wetland. Sure enough, this is a UNESCO heritage site of a dedicated international wetland. And so that would mean that pond of water that we see, there's an international border goes through, but China and Russia get along in the management of that watershed. But that's kind of exciting and good news. I'm at the end point. China border comes right to the front and seals this off, because in one of their treaties that didn't fare so well in 1860, the other powers made sure China would not have access to the ocean, which is only about 7 miles ahead near the top of the slide. So at this point, the China border ends. You can see the barbed wire. Russia is to our left. Russia is in front of us, and Korea is on that side. China is denied access to the sea, and that treaty has lasted 150 years. That just terminates that water that we were just looking at. Here's another border. Climbing up, Mike would like this. This is a volcanic area, an old cone that is there in North Korea, and you can see some water's tumbling out of it, so we kept on going. This is the border area. think is maybe the prettiest border that I've ever seen. This is Light Crater Lake. And going right down through the middle of this, it actually was a boundary that made sense. They were going to divide it according to watersheds. So all the water on the north side is going to go that way, all on the south side is going to go that way. So let's draw the boundary right through there. It goes right through the middle of the lake. Oh, gorgeous, huh? But sure enough, down in that, there's a little bit of that which is covered with sediment. And what you see on the far side, the North Korean military has a base camp down in this caldera, in this volcano, to make sure that people aren't going to swim across the caldera. I don't know for what reason. It's stupid. Went to another place. This is a place called Dandun. The river is fairly wide here. There are a couple of big bridges, which this one on the right is not finished. The Chinese actually celebrate this river. The Chinese tourists like to go there because this is where they stood up to the U.S. military and in the Korean War. China wasn't going to be an aggressor. They didn't want U.S. troops coming in, and so right here is a place where this river is where they felt they held the line. But we go up to the little bit north of that, and here we're looking down at that river. Oh, sorry, they were looking across. For whatever reasons, it's stuck. But we could see there how poor North Korea is. People still moving things up here. There's the border. On the far side on the left is North Korea. On the right is China. You notice the river is very small at that point. So you could get a little boat to take you on a trip. So we went down this one, seemingly peaceful as we move our way along. And it was at this point a Korean military person came running down on the other side, shouting. There was a Korean person, or a Chinese person who understood Korean, managing this boat. And the person came running down and said, "No, no, 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 no." And he had the gun in hand. And so the boat person said, "I think we probably ought to turn around now and not get any closer." And again, I'm here, so I survived being that close to the North Korean unguarded boundary. Here we go to a fascinating place. Ed Hamming told me about the Commerce Mountains when I took that class, deep in the central part of Asia. If we want to just briefly look at that, the location of the Pamirs, it's right up the big knot where the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas all come together. And Hamming talked about that, and I remembered it so much that I thought, sometime I want to visit the Pamirs. Well, I didn't get to do it until about 10 years ago, when I was a little over 60 already, but you can see the height of these mountains. We're going up this valley. Camels along the way, just enjoy the scenes. Road was blocked. I've been there twice. One of the times it was kind of cloudy and overcast, and that's why this weather is different. But there you see our road was blocked. The herds were taking the animals up into the high countryside for the summer. I love pastoral nomadism. I almost use that as a focus for today. How these people who tend animals, they understand water and grass and roots as well as anybody on the planet. How they can find enough water and food for their goats or their sheep or their camels or whatever. And here these folks moving up for the summer months. Here they go. This person taking care of the little fragile one that might not have made it. And my wife was along fearing that if the little one won't make it, then they'll have to kill it. And so Janet, she said, "Come on, little guy, little gal, you better get going or your life's going to be in a hurry." And to this, we don't know whether he made it, but but Janet was trying to help out for that second. Well, you keep on going, and the mountains still loom in front of you, and finally you get to the top. And you're up at about 13,000 feet at that point. Magnificent sand dunes. And the mountain that we see up there is Kyrgyzstan 25.3. That's the highest mountains I've ever seen. That's 11,000 feet higher than everything in Colorado, Mount Kyrgyzstan. And so look at that. This is, by the way, I include this in the border unit because this is right where China, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan all come together. And so this is a kind of landscape on that border. A few fields there. Again, that's Kyrgyzstan in the back. It was as good as I ever imagined Hamming describing it. Sometimes, you know, you and I have things where you build up expectations, and when you get there, it isn't quite enough. This was exceeded my expectations, our expectations. They live in these yurts. Here they were putting up some yurts for the summer. These movable features. There's a tent that was already up and somebody tending the animals. Here's one of those herders out with their zoos and with their yaks and with some cattle, trying to eke out a living in that grassland. My goodness, and these are some Kyrgyz girls. This is in China, but these are some Kyrgyz girls. They're tending their animals and their family for the summer. You look to the right and there's Mustagada 24/7. And in that part of the world, they believe that that's where Moses is buried. Not really back in Israel, but they believe somehow Moses made it here and the soul of Moses is in this. Not that they're obviously not Jewish, but they know of Moses as a historical figure and they think his soul is in Mustagada. Incredible. Mustagada. And this, so you see 25/3, 24/7. That's why, again, everyone in the room, even if you're not a geographer, a physical geographer, a human being, everyone in the room would be excited about seeing this place. Well, what's happening? Here's where road's going in. And there you've got trucks coming from Pakistan and the road grading equipment. We are now told, I'm hesitant to go back because I'm now told with China's rapid construction, China now has as many miles of interstate highway as the United States does. And in about 10 more years, they're going to have 60,000, about 15,000 more than what we have. And they told me there's a big modern road now going through here connecting China and Pakistan. I'm not sure I want to see it because it will change the character of these herding places as the land connection between China and Pakistan. Borders change with transportation. All of you know, so I think I'm repeating some obvious points. Another part of that, this is going a little bit further on. This is getting near the border with Kyrgyzstan. Again, just enjoy the scenery. Here's some camels, again, sharing the road with us. I like this one, where the motor scooter is leading the camel along the way. Modernization is occurring. Here you've got the traditional yurts and the motor scooter. Some interesting stuff happening. Suddenly over one of the hills came this herd of goats. And here's the young gal going by. I stepped back with my camera and let her go by. And as she walked by, when she was close enough to me, she said, "Hello, how are you?" in perfect English. And I was reminded then how fast the lingual pattern, the language stuff is spreading across the globe. One of the persons whom I asked about said, yes, she probably has stayed at home and learned English, and she has hopes of getting into school so that then she will be able to be something other than a herder. Nothing wrong with being a herder, but they don't make much money, so you never know what will happen. And this end is the border, near the border between Kyrgyzstan and China. And then in the U.S., I love the U.S.-Canadian border. That's another personal interest. This is at Sault Ste. Marie, for me, one of the favorite towns anywhere around, where you can see this place. Here, the U.S. and Canada have been cooperating for 150 years. For water and for transportation, as the big boats go through the Sault. That's a model for how borders can be permeable and almost de-bordered, as some people would call it. Or you get a simple boundary like this between Maine and New Brunswick. Look at how simple this is, how easy it is to cross between the U.S. and Canada. But this is the one. This is in Derby, Vermont. You come to the border. Got to go through the usual things. The name of this town is officially now it's called Stansted, but it used to be Rock Island. So we actually have stamped on our passport, Rock Island, Canada. And you go into this point, and of course you know you're moving into Quebec with the two languages, so you know now, but notice how open it is. Still here on the U.S. side, but notice how easy you just drive through that street. Here we are now on the other side. And maybe the most unique boundary I've ever known, it goes through this building. This is a combination opera house and library that is shared by U.S. and Canada, and you can go in the building in this place, and sure enough, there's a marking on the floor. Oh, I just am crossing into Canada now. So it would be like drawing a line in our library here. So again, that's how easy some borders are. Lastly, thank you for your patience. But the human-environment interaction theme has been really important also in my life. I'm a cultural geographer, but I'm fascinated by how people have managed. Rice growing is very, very difficult for anybody. Everything, this is all seedlings which have to be transplanted. Here you see seedlings, and then finally every one of these has to be planted individually. So there's a song that the Philippines sing, and they sing this when they're planting rice. Planting rice is never fun. Work from morn to set of sun. Cannot stand, cannot sit, cannot let rest a little bit. Planting rice is no fun. Work from morn to set of sun. It's an incredible example of the human modifications of the environment to make it work. When we talk ecologically in geography, it's both ways. There's no environmental determinism. It's nature and culture, each influencing the other. Think of what these rice people have to do. Those are bundles of seedlings, each of which were broken apart, every one of those individually planted in water. So it'd be like looking at our American corn landscape and imagine every one of those corn plants out in the field, individually put in the field, in the transplanting process. Look at this. That's no good work. Be thankful for whatever your jobs are when you see that. And notice, also for wet rice to work, you can't just have a gentle slope like we might have for corn or soybeans, but it'll be in some steps like this. That means they got to turn this into a terraced slope. Now this is the area near Lena Zhou's home, her hometown, big city, near Zhengzhou in China, and I'm impressed by this because what they're harvesting here is wheat. This is on the border between where they grow rice and where they grow wheat. Further north it's all wheat and corn, further south it's rice. But they're threshing wheat. But then at the end of the wheat season, they will build up these bunds to sort of create an area where water can collect. And there you see them. Now they're preparing the ground. Now they've got these bunds around the edge to retain the water. They're preparing this. They're harvesting wheat. And then planting rice. And now they're preparing for next year. They're dumping down some stuff for fertilizer. And when the rice season is over, they will level the bunds and plant wheat. And then the next year they'll build the bunds and plant rice. And then halfway over, tear down the bunds, and now you can have larger cultivation with this kind of equipment for wheat. I can't imagine the effort. I mean, it makes Illinois farming easy compared to what they have to do for this. Human modification is a system that makes the system work. We go to the Philippines. We have to go past this border crossing because there was some guerrilla activities in the mountains, but again, it was okay, I guess, because I wasn't shot, so I'm here. But we went up here and wanted to see this. Remember this slope. There are not many trees. The Philippines have been really badly deforested. But there's a lot of water there. And so we went up. This is a place I stayed, no tourist gate. This is a long way from Manila. But one of our other grads, Cleve Charles, was the #2 person in the economics section of the U.S. Embassy. So he said, come on over. He remembered me talking about this in class. He hadn't been there, but the two of us made the trip. Again, this exceeded my expectations. To give an idea about these terraces, I tell students and can tell you, from Fifth Avenue, or the college track, let's say, up to the up campus is a distance of an elevation change of about 120 feet. In that same distance this way, from 5th Avenue to 14th Avenue, or to 10th Avenue, in the Philippines, this stuff that's terraced, multiply this by 10. So instead of being 140 feet, it's 1,400 feet, fully terraced, from 5th Avenue to 10th Avenue, a 1,400-foot elevation with this kind of terracing to take advantage of that landscape. Again, it's got to be one of the most impressive human modification of the, and they've been doing this, they've done this for 2,000 years. It works. And look at those beautiful fields that are there. In a hilly landscape, they've turned it into the flat areas for rice. And this next one, I guess, proves that I was there. Okay, I'm sitting out and standing out in these fields. Again, I'd heard about this, used it in a lab as a kind of topo map thing, and I thought, what's this like when I finally see it? It exceeded my expectations. And here it gets to a key point. This is a village that's there, but notice the upper portion of that is forested. People in the Philippines are very poor, and I'd seen how much of it was cut. And so through a translator, I asked, you've got trees up there. and you're kind of a poor village. Why don't you cut the trees? And they said, if we cut the trees, the water will wash out our terraces. So it's exactly the stuff that Reuben and I would teach in a watershed. You can't do things upstream in a watershed that are bad, or they will mess up the lower portion of the watershed. And here was this wonderful folk knowledge from these people without any high school or college degrees. They just know if we mess up those trees, our villages and our rice fields are going to be gone. Go to another rice place. When I go to this place, I've been here about 6 times. It's one of the places that I just feel like this is really important. This is the place, the Rice Research Institute. The U.S. got involved with that in 1960, and it's been going on ever since. And what it is doing, you're very patient to be listening to all of this. But one of the pieces of data that comes out of this, well, I'll just give you the numbers. That we know in the world that it would be impossible to expand the area of cultivation for food. It's all gone. If you take the main grains, the amount of area that's being harvested now is only a little bit more than when I started college. There's just no room left on the planet to expand. Thank goodness for the stuff that occurs here. The only way then that you can increase the food is to get more yield per acre. And in this case, they've gone from globally, for all the grains, from 1.3 tons per hectare to 3.24. And that's because of what happens here. Norman Borlaug, a fellow from northeast Iowa, who was a key person, we somehow have to make this small-scale farmers be able to work. They have 115,000 varieties of rice in this building, money drawn from the Asian sphere. It's so important in their life, even as you can see in the naming of the cars that some of us in the room own. And here's where they did some genetic crossbreeding. The famous one that worked when they took a variety from Vietnam and married it, so to speak, with a pega, and you ended up with a new high-yielding variety. The stalk was shorter, it wouldn't bend over in rainstorms, and it still was okay. And then they've gone on to many other things. And Norman, here now they have a refrigerated area. They're continuing to experiment. Here they were experimenting with how can we have some rice that will grow in Korea, a cold climate rice. Thank goodness for the work at these international Green Revolution centers. I know they've got some limitations, but we want to end in Chicago because here, the last one, I've been influenced strongly in my life by the Burnham Plan of Chicago, 1909, when Daniel Burnham and other leaders in Montgomery Ward said the lakefront belongs to the people, and Kathy in River Action during with this, the lakefront belongs to the people. It shouldn't be for just industry, and it shouldn't be for just rich people. And we know now there's Grant Park over on the right, and when you look at the features that are there, how magnificent it is here. Now they're reconstructing a prairie and a wetland with Chicago as the backdrop. You and I can walk through there, poor or rich, it doesn't make any difference. And when you look north, Daniel Burnham preserved 26 miles of Chicago waterfront. There's nothing like it in the world. And so even the famous historian Richard Wade and the famous geographer Harold Mayer in their book say this is the greatest urban plan in the history of the world. Not that because of the way it outlines some of the things that should happen, particularly in this human-environment interaction. And as a Chicagoan who grew up not that far from the lake, to find that also a key part of my teaching world, it has been a very important thing. And here it continues all the way down to the south side, down to places where we live. And so I'm ready just for the last few closing statements. On here, well, I know what I want to say without the notes. So I hope when you leave here that what will come out of this from your own boundaries is do what you can to make the boundaries of your life integrated and interdependent with your neighbors, with neighboring towns and states and internationally. Do all you can in your actions and statements to others to allow natural processes to function within the borders that they need, floodplains, wetlands, Ecosystems, I didn't even mention that. The biologists can tell us how ecosystems, what do you need if you're really going to have elk herds, or if you're going to have caribou herds, or if you're going to have polar bears. Let the human-made borders cooperate with natural processes. And then symbolically, even on this campus, do what you can to make the boundaries between departments, between faculty and administration, between faculty and all of the support staff as integrated and permeable and seamless as possible. And since there are some students here, I would say also between faculty and students, make those borders permeable and seamless to strengthen, or from some people's view, restore a sense of community in this place.